Today, I'll explain the use of the wrist for the forehand loop. The greatest strength in the arm comes from the upper arm. The second greatest strength comes from the forearm. The third source of strength is the wrist. In other words, the wrist has the weakest strength. This is unlike the backhand. For the backhand, the wrist strength is significant. Some players use their wrist to generate power for the forehand loop. However, when they do that, the power generated is not very strong. Additionally, some players fail to stabilize their wrist. They let it wobble. When looping the paddle, is the upper arm, is the forearm. Should not the wrist align in the same direction, and the arm to move in one direction? Some players frequently exhibit this motion when looping. This results in a lack of power in your shots, because all the power is concentrated in the wrist, which is particularly weak for the forehand. In the forehand loop, the wrist cannot generate significant power. Overusing the wrist can even lead to cramps. Therefore, the greatest power comes from the upper arm. The upper arm generates power, followed by the forearm, and then the wrist. So what are the forearm and wrist used for? They are for controlling the shot, transforming the power from the upper arm into spin force. As we mentioned before, the swing trajectory for looping should be more circular. The forearm and wrist should create a circular motion, giving a sense of holding the ball on the paddle. This allows you to better control the power in your hand and convert it more effectively into spin force. Therefore, the sequence of the swing is crucial. Some players use a sequence of wrist, upper arm, and then forearm. This approach lacks power. The correct sequence for generating power is upper arm, forearm, and finally the wrist. The forearm and wrist should accelerate quickly, which will improve your control over the shot. So, if the wrist is used correctly, it can enhance the explosive force at the moment of releasing the shot and improve friction. If it's not used correctly, it can cause a break in motion. So everyone must pay attention. Some of you drop your wrist while playing. Why do you drop the wrist? To activate the wrist motion. It's not intentional. It's to find the feel of the wrist movement. Have you ever seen anyone drop their wrist during a loop? If the wrist is dropped, there's no rotation and no quality in the shot. So during the backswing, look here. Relax the wrist and let it hang naturally, like this. See this angle? Don't lift the wrist. If you lift the wrist, there's no room for wrist movement. You can only push the ball. Also, don't drop it too much. That will only produce a slow loop, and your power won't transfer effectively to the shot. If you're like this, how can you generate power? Don't drop the wrist. Let it hang naturally back. When looping, you can pull back slightly. Let the wrist open slightly. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. And swing forward like this. At this angle. At this angle. See, this is the angle we use when looping. Also, the most important point. What is everyone's misunderstanding about the wrist? If the racket head is already pointing at yourself, it means the wrist has swung too far. The wrist's power depends on what? If you make any movement after contact, the shot is already out. We need to catch the shot at the moment of contact with a paw. Catch it. Notice how all the power is concentrated. Pa. The follow-through motion just flows naturally after that. If you do it this way, you're just moving the wrist. You only have wrist power in this case. Let's see it in slow motion. I'll show you the details. Now watch how my wrist moves during the loop. The wrist ends up aligned in a straight line with the forearm. It doesn't continue to whip forward. The wrist stops at the end. It aligns with the forearm in a straight line. Pay close attention to Fangbo's wrist motion. There's a slight swing, but I only move it to this position. It's not like some of you who overly use wrist movements. Let me demonstrate live. First, a correct example, then an incorrect one. This is a proper example. This is how professional players feel during a loop. Now let me show you an incorrect example. Using the wrist excessively to loop, watch the shot quality. Watch the difference in quality. This type of shot has lower quality. The power cannot be fully transferred to the ball. When we focus on spin, this can work. It doesn't need to penetrate the ball. It focuses on friction. But if we want to strike through the paddle, using the wrist, do you think that would work? As I mentioned about the backswing, it should be in like this. Only this motion can allow the shot to penetrate, right? This is how the shot can penetrate. If you overuse the wrist, take a look at what I mean by overusing the wrist. Many of you think the wrist moves like this to make adjustments, right? Let me explain this concept. Using the wrist, the power cannot penetrate fully. Our power should follow through after making contact with the shot. It should swing forward. Take a side view. The ball is here. Shouldn't our power follow through like this? If you move the wrist, what kind of shot will it create? This type of shot. If you say you'll move the wrist after the shot penetrates, the shot is already gone. If we don't penetrate the shot fully and simply move the wrist, you'll see the shot stops. It doesn't penetrate fully. That's why your forehand loop lacks power. During mid-distance looping, are you all looping like this? If you use fingers and wrist, look, I'll loop with fingers and wrist only. That's the maximum power I can generate. It can only create friction. If I loop lightly though, and use forearm and upper arm, the closer we are to the table, the more we use the wrist. But the wrist is used mainly for adjustments, not for creating extra friction. Let's revisit slow motion. In a continuous looping scenario, the wrist barely moves. The shot mainly relies on the upper arm driving the forearm forward. This ensures better stability for continuous looping. Observe how I use my fingers and wrist. It happens only at the moment of contact with the ball, a slight finger and wrist adjustment. Look at the moment of contact, see? Focus on the moment of contact with the shot. Got it? The whole motion doesn't rely solely on those. Your forehand can't be this effective. If you focus only on moving the fingers and wrist, just loop as you normally would. Watch the slow motion. Chen Feng's backswing is identical to Fangbo's. They use the same angle, swing upward and forward to hit the shot. Observe his looping angle and racket position. Check if it matches mine, it's slightly angled outward. At contact, the racket opens up slightly and loops forward. After the loop, after completing the loop, don't let the wrist pop up. Absolutely don't lift the wrist, okay? That's because if you overuse the wrist, you can't penetrate the shot. By joining my membership, you can watch more than 10 videos in advance and access 30 professional tutorial videos by Fangbo. I will continue to update a members-only video every week. These videos cover everything from beginner basics to advanced techniques,
because it's possible for him to push it to your forehand area,
ensuring you'll find the skills you need. The cost ranges from $1 to $3, depending on your region. Thank you all for your support.